Sitting in front of the Coal Valley house with pieces of the mangled mailbox scattered across the lawn behind him, Joey realized that when he'd driven away from the crash scene on the interstate 20 years ago, he had forgotten about the jar and the eyes. Either the head injury had resulted in selective amnesia, or he'd willed himself to forget. He was overcome by the sick feeling that the explanation involved more of the latter than the former, that his moral courage, not his physiology, had failed him. In that alternate reality, the jar lay hidden in a weedy field, but here it was, in Celeste's grip. She had dropped the flashlight and held fast to the jar with both hands, perhaps because she was afraid that the lid would come loose and the contents would spill into her lap. She shoved the container into the glove box and slammed the small door shut. Gasping, half sobbing, she hugged herself and bent forward in her seat. "Oh, shit! Oh, shit! Oh, shit!" she chanted, using the word no more lightly now than before, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that he wouldn't have been surprised if it had broken apart in his hands. Joey was filled with an inner turmoil more violent than the hard shatters of wind-driven rain that broke over the Mustang. He was on the brink of understanding the jar, where it came from, whose eyes it contained, what it meant, why he had blocked it from memory all these years. But he couldn't quite bring himself to step off that brink into the cold void of truth, perhaps because he knew that he didn't yet possess the strength to face what he would discover at the bottom of the fall. "I didn't," he said miserably. Celeste was rocking in her seat, hugging herself, huddled over her crossed arms, making a low, tortured sound. "I didn't," he repeated. Slowly she raised her head. Her eyes were as appealing as ever, suggesting unusual depths of character and knowledge beyond her years, but a new quality informed them as well, something disturbing. Perhaps it was an unsought and unwanted awareness of the human capacity for evil. She still looked like the girl he had picked up only 8 or 10 miles back along the road, but in a fundamental sense she was not that girl anymore, and she could never return to the state of innocence in which she had entered the night. She was not a schoolgirl now, not the shy doe who had blushed when revealing the crush she had on him. And that was unspeakably sad. He said, "I didn't put the jar there. I didn't put the eyes in the jar. It wasn't me." "I know," she said simply, and with a firm conviction for which he loved her. She glanced at the glove box, then back at him. "You couldn't have. Not you. Not you, Joey, not ever. You aren't capable of anything like that." Again he teetered on a precipice of revelation, but a tide of anguish washed him back from it rather than over the edge. "They've got to be her eyes." "The blonde in the plastic tarp?" "Yeah. And I think somehow I know who she is. Know how she wound up dead with her eyes cut out. But I just can't quite remember." "Earlier you said that she was more than a vision, more than a drunk's hallucination." "Yeah, for sure. She's a memory. I saw her for real somewhere sometime." He put one hand to his forehead, gripping his skull so tightly that his hand shook with the effort and the muscles twitched the length of his arm as if he could pull the forgotten knowledge out of himself. "Who could have gotten in your car to leave the jar?" she asked. "I don't know." "Where were you early in the evening before you set out to go to college?" "Home. Asherville. My folks' house. I didn't stop anywhere between there and your Valiant." "Was the Mustang in the garage?" "We don't have a garage. It's not that kind of house." "Was it locked?" "No." "Then anybody could have gotten into your car." "Yeah, maybe." No one had come out of the house in front of them because it was one of the first properties condemned in Coal Valley, abandoned for months. On the white aluminum siding, someone had spray-painted a big 4 and drawn a circle around it. As red as fresh blood in the Mustang headlights, the number was not graffiti but an official designation. It meant that the house would be the 4th structure to be torn down when the last citizens of Coal Valley moved out and the demolition crew came in with its bulldozers. The state and federal bureaucracies had been so inefficient and slow in dealing with the mine fire that it had been allowed to spread relentlessly until its white-hot tributaries lay under the entire valley, whereupon it had grown too far-reaching to be extinguished by anything other than time and nature. With the destruction of the village, however, the authorities clearly intended to be as orderly and speedy as a clockwork military operation. "We're sitting ducks here," he said. Without checking Celeste's hands, certain that this immobility had already resulted in a resurgence of the stigmata, he shifted the Mustang into reverse and backed across the lawn to the street. So much rain had fallen that he was worried about getting bogged down in the soft sod, but they reached the blacktop without trouble. "Where now?" she asked. "We'll look around town." "For what?" "Anything out of the ordinary." "It's all out of the ordinary." "We'll know it when we see it." He cruised slowly along Coal Valley Road, which was the main thoroughfare through town. At the first intersection, Celeste pointed to a narrow street on the left. "Our house is over there." A block away, through beaded curtains of rain and past a few screening pines, several windows were filled with a welcoming amber light. No other house in that direction appeared to be occupied. "All the neighbors are gone, moved out," Celeste confirmed. "Mom and Dad are alone over there." "And they may be safer alone," he reminded her, crossing the intersection, driving slowly past her street, studying both sides of the main drag. Even though Coal Valley Road led to destinations beyond the town of Coal Valley itself, they had encountered no pass-through traffic, and Joey figured that they weren't likely to encounter any. Numerous experts and officials had assured the public that the highway was fundamentally safe, and that there was no danger of sudden subsidence swallowing unwary motorists. Following the demolition of the village, however, the road was scheduled for condemnation and removal, and the residents of those mountain towns had long ago become skeptical about anything the experts had to say about the mine fire. Alternate routes had become popular. Ahead of them on the left was St. Thomas's Catholic Church, where services had once been conducted every Saturday and Sunday by the rector and the curate of Our Lady of Sorrows in Asherville, who were circuit priests covering two other small churches in that part of the county. It was not a grand house of worship, but a wooden structure with plain rather than stained glass windows. Joey's attention was drawn to St. Thomas's by flickering light at the windows, a flashlight. Inside, each time the beam moved, shadows spun and leaped as though they were tormented spirits. He angled across the street and coasted to a stop in front of the church. He doused the headlights and switched off the engine. At the top of the concrete steps, the double doors stood open. "It's an invitation," Joey said. "You think he's in there?" "It's a pretty good bet." In the church, the light blinked off. "Stay here," Joey said, opening his door. "Like hell! I wish you would." "No," she said adamantly. Anything could happen in there. Anything could happen out here, too. He couldn't argue with the truth of that. When he got out and went around to the back of the car, Celeste followed him, pulling up the hood on her raincoat. The rain was now mixed with sleet, as when he'd lived through this night the first time and crashed on the interstate. It ticked against the Mustang with a sound like scrabbling claws. When he opened the trunk, he more than half expected to find the dead blonde. She wasn't there. He removed the combination crowbar and lug wrench from the sidewell that contained the jack. It was made of cast iron, comfortingly heavy in his hand. In the faint glow of the trunk light, Celeste saw the toolbox and opened it even as Joey was hefting the crowbar. She extracted a large screwdriver. "It's not a knife," she said, "but it's something." Joey wished that she would stay behind in the car with the doors locked. If anyone showed up, she could blow the horn and he would be at her side in seconds. Although he had met her hardly an hour ago, he already knew her well enough to recognize the futility of trying to dissuade her from accompanying him. In spite of her delicate beauty, she was uncommonly tough and resilient. Any lingering uncertainties of youth, which might have inhibited her, had been burned away forever with the realization that she'd been marked for rape and murder, and with the discovery of the eyes in the jar. The world as she knew it had abruptly become a far darker and more disturbing place than it had been when the day began, when she had absorbed that change and adapted to it with surprising and admirable courage. Joey didn't bother to close the trunk quietly. The open doors of the church made it clear that the man who had led him onto Coal Valley Road was expecting him to follow here as well. "Stay close," he said. She nodded grimly. "Guaranteed." In the front yard of St. Thomas's, a 1-foot diameter vent pipe rose 6 feet above the ground. It was surrounded by an hourglass construction of chain link, which served as a safety barrier. Plumes of mine fire smoke rose from deep underground and wafted from the top of the pipe, lessening the likelihood that toxic fumes would build to dangerous levels in the church and in nearby homes. During the past 20 years, as all efforts to extinguish or even to contain the subterranean inferno had proved inadequate, almost 2,000 such vents had been installed. In spite of the continuous scrubbing by the rain, the air around the entrance to St. Thomas's had a sulphurous stench, as if some rough beast, slouching toward Bethlehem to be born, had taken a detour to Coal Valley. Painted in red on the front of the church was a large 13 with a red circle around it. Curiously, Joey thought of Judas, the 13th apostle, the betrayer of Jesus. The number on the wall merely indicated that the building had been the 13th property in Coal Valley to be condemned and added to the master demolition list, but he couldn't shake the notion that it was significant for other reasons. In his heart he knew that it was a warning to guard against betrayal, but betrayal from what source? He hadn't gone to Mass in 2 decades, until the funeral this morning. He had called himself an agnostic and sometimes an atheist for many years, yet suddenly everything he saw and everything that happened seemed to have a religious association for him. Of course, in one sense, he wasn't a cynical and faithless man of 40 anymore, but a young man of 20 who had still been an altar boy less than 2 years ago. Perhaps this strange fall backward in time had brought him closer to the faith of his youth. 13. Judas. Betrayal. Rather than dismiss that train of thought as superstition, he took it seriously and decided to be more cautious than ever. Sleet had not yet mantled the sidewalk in ice, and the scattered pellets crunched under their feet. At the top of the steps at the open doors, Celeste clicked on the small flashlight that she had brought from the car, dispelling some of the darkness inside. They crossed the threshold side by side. She slashed left and right with the beam, quickly revealing that no one was waiting for them in the narthex. A white marble holy water font stood at the entrance to the nave. Joey discovered that it was empty, slid his fingers along the dry bottom of the bowl, and crossed himself anyway. He advanced into the church with the crowbar raised and ready, holding it firmly in both hands. He wasn't willing to trust to the grace of God. Celeste handled the flashlight expertly, probing quickly to all sides as though accustomed to conducting searches for homicidal maniacs. Although no masses had been said in St. Thomas's for the past 5 or 6 months, Joey suspected that the electrical service was not disconnected. For safety reasons, the power might have been left on, because all the dangers inherent in an abandoned building were greater in darkness. Now that official indifference and incompetence had resulted in the loss of the entire town to the hidden, hungry fire below, the authorities were uniformly enthusiastic proponents of safety measures. A faint scent of incense lingered from past masses, but it was largely masked by the smell of damp wood and mildew. A trace of sulphurous fumes laced the air as well, and that stink gradually grew stronger till it drowned the spicy aroma from all the old ceremonies of innocence. Although volleys of sleet rattled against the roof and the windows, the nave was filled with the familiar hush of all churches and with a sense of quiet expectation. Usually it was an expectation of the subtle visitation of a divine presence, but now it was the apprehension of a hateful intrusion into that once consecrated space. Holding the crowbar in one fist, he slid his other hand along the wall to the left of the narthex arch. He couldn't locate any switches. Encouraging Celeste to move to the right of the arch, he felt along that wall until he found a panel of 4 switches. He snapped them all up with one sweep of his hand. From overhead, cone-shaped fixtures cast dim chrome-yellow lights on the ranks of pews. Along the walls, hooded sconces directed soft light down across the 14 stations of the cross and onto the dusty wood floor. The front of the church beyond the sanctuary railing remained shrouded in shadows. Nevertheless, Joey could see that everything sacred had been removed, including all the statuary and the great crucifix that had graced the wall behind the altar. Occasionally, as a boy, he had traveled with the priest from Asherville to Coal Valley, to serve when the local altar boys were ill or were for some other reason unavailable, and so he was familiar with the appearance of St. Thomas's prior to its deconsecration. Carved by a villager in the latter part of the previous century, the 12-foot-high crucifix had been a rough piece of work, but Joey had been fascinated by it, for it had possessed a power that he'd never seen in more professionally carved and polished versions. When his gaze settled from the blank wall where the crucifix had been, he saw a pale and shapeless mound on the elevated altar platform. A soft radiance seemed to issue from it, but he knew that was only a trick of reflection and his imagination. They walked cautiously along the center aisle, checking the pews to the left and right, where someone could have been crouching out of sight waiting to spring at them. The church was small, capable of seating approximately 200 people, but this night there was neither a single worshiper nor a beast among the pews. When Joey opened the gate in the sanctuary railing, the hinges squealed. Celeste hesitated, then preceded him into the sanctuary. She was riveted by the pale mound on the altar platform, but she didn't direct the flashlight at it, evidently preferring as he did to delay the inevitable revelation. As the low gate creaked shut behind him, Joey glanced back into the nave. No one had entered behind them. Directly ahead was the choir enclosure. The chairs, the music stands, and the organ had all been hauled away. They followed the ambulatory to the left, around the choir. Though they tried to tread lightly, their footfalls on the oak floor echoed hollowly through the empty church. On the wall beside the door to the sacristy were more switches. Joey flicked them and the sanctuary filled with sour light. No brighter than that in the nave. He motioned for Celeste to slip past the closed door, and when she was out of the way, he kicked it open as he had seen cops do in countless movies, rushed across the threshold and swung the crowbar with all his might, right to left and back again on the assumption that someone was waiting for him there. He hoped to surprise and cripple the bastard with a preemptive blow, but the length of iron cut the empty air with a whoosh. Enough light spilled past him from the sanctuary to confirm that the sacristy was deserted. The outer door was standing open when he entered, but a gust of cold wind threw it shut. "He's already gone," Joey told Celeste, who stood rigid with fear in the inner doorway. They returned to the sanctuary, followed the ambulatory to the presbytery, and stopped at the foot of the 3 altar steps. Joey's heart slammed in his breast. Beside him, Celeste made a soft, plaintive sound, not a gasp of horror, but a murmur of compassion, regret, despair. No. The high altar with its hand-carved antependium was gone. Only the altar platform remained. The mound that they had seen from the nave was neither as pale nor as shapeless as it had appeared to be when the sanctuary lights had been off. Portions of the fetally curled corpse were visible through the heavy-gauge rumpled plastic. Her face was concealed, but a limp flag of blonde hair trailed out of a gap in the folds of the tarp. This was no precognitive vision. Not an hallucination, either. Not merely a memory. This time the body was real. Nevertheless, the events of the past 24 hours had left Joey in doubt about what was real and what was not. He distrusted his own senses enough to seek confirmation from Celeste. "You see it too, don't you?" "Yes." "The body?" "Yes." He touched the thick plastic. It crackled under his fingers. One slender alabaster arm was exposed. The hand was cupped, and a nail hole marked the center. The fingernails were torn and caked with blood. Although he knew that the blonde was dead, in his heart Joey harbored a fragile and irrational hope that the eyes in the jar were not hers, that a thread of life still sewed her to this world, and that she might yet be resuscitated. He dropped to his knees on the top altar step and put his fingertips against her wrist, seeking at least a feeble pulse. He found no pulse, but the contact with her cold flesh jolted him as if he'd grasped a live electrical wire, and he was shocked into another memory that had been long suppressed. Only wanting to help, carrying the 2 suitcases through the icy rain to the back of the car, putting them down on the gravel driveway to unlock the trunk. He raises the lid, and the small bulb inside the trunk is as dim as a half-melted votive candle in a ruby-dark glass. The light is tinted red, in fact, because the bulb is smeared with the blood. The hot copper stench of fresh blood virtually steams from that cramped space, making him gag. She is there. She is there. She is completely and totally there, so utterly unexpected that she might have been mistaken for hallucination, but instead she is more solid than granite, more real than a punch in the face, naked but swaddled in a semi-transparent tarp, face hidden by her long blonde hair and by smears of blood on the inner surface of the plastic. One bare arm is free of the shroud, and the delicate hand is turned with the palm up, revealing a cruel wound. She seems to reach out beseechingly to him, seeking the mercy that she has found nowhere else in the night. His heart swells so terribly with each apocalyptic beat that it cramps his lungs and prevents him from drawing a breath. As the iron treads of thunder roll across the mountains, he hopes that lightning will strike him, that he will join the blonde in death, because trying to carry on with life after this discovery will be too hard, too painful, joyless, and pointless. Then someone speaks behind him, barely louder than the susurrant song of the rain and wind. Joey. If he's not permitted to die here right now in the storm, then he prays to God to be struck deaf, to be blinded, to be freed from the obligations of a witness. Joey. Joey. Such sadness in the voice. He turns from the battered corpse. In the nebulous blood-tinted light, he faces tragedy, faces the ruination of 4 lives in addition to that of the woman in the car trunk, his own, his mother's, his father's, his brother's. "I only wanted to help," he tells PJ. "I only wanted to help." Joey exhaled explosively, then inhaled with a shudder. "It's my brother. He killed her." Chapter 11. There were rats in the church. 2 fat ones scuttled along the back of the sanctuary, squeaking, briefly casting elongated shadows, vanishing into a hole in the wall. "Your brother? PJ?" Celeste said in disbelief. Although she had been 5 years behind PJ in school, she knew who he was. Everyone in Asherville and all the surrounding villages had known P.J. Shannon even before he'd become a world-famous author. As a sophomore at County High, he had become the youngest quarterback in the history of the football team, a star player who had led his teammates to the divisional championship, and then had done it twice again in his junior and senior years. He was a straight-A student, valedictorian of his graduating class, humble in spite of his natural gifts and achievements, a real people-loving guy, handsome, charming, funny. And the most difficult thing to reconcile with the body in the trunk, P.J. was kind. He gave a lot of time to charitable activities at Our Lady of Sorrows. When a friend was ill, P.J. was always first in attendance with a small gift and get-well wishes. If a friend was in trouble, P.J. was at his side to provide whatever help he could. Unlike many other jocks, P.J. wasn't cliquish. He was as likely to be found hanging out with the skinny, myopic president of the chess club as with members of the varsity team, and he had no tolerance for the nerd-baiting and other cruelties in which popular, good-looking kids sometimes indulged. P.J. had been the best brother in the world, but he was also a brutal killer. Joey couldn't reconcile those two facts. It would have been easy to go mad trying. Remaining on his knees on the top altar step, Joey released the dead woman's cold wrist. From the touch of her flesh, in a manner almost mystical, he'd received a dreadful and shattering revelation. He could have been no more profoundly affected if he had instead just now seen a Eucharist transformed from a wafer of unleavened bread into the sacred flesh of God. P.J. had been home on a visit from New York City that weekend, he told Celeste. After college, he'd landed a job as an editorial assistant at a major publishing house, figuring to work there until he could get a foot in the door of the film business. We'd had a lot of fun together on Saturday, the whole family, but after Mass on Sunday morning, P.J. had been out all day, seeing old friends from high school to talk about the glory days, and driving around a little to enjoy the fall foliage. Taking a long, lazy nostalgia bath, he called it. At least that was what he said he'd been doing. Celeste turned her back to the altar platform and stood facing the nave, either because she could no longer tolerate the sight of the dead woman or because she feared that P.J. would creep back into the church and take them unaware. We usually had Sunday supper at 5 o'clock, but Mom held it up for him, and he didn't get home till 6, Joey said. Well after dark. He apologized, shamefaced, said he'd been having so much fun with his old friends he'd lost track of time. All through dinner he was so on, spinning out jokes, full of energy, as if being in his old stomping grounds had given him a big kick and revitalized him. Joey folded the loose flap of the plastic tarp over the dead woman's bare arm. There was something obscene about her punctured hand being exposed on the altar, even if St. Thomas's had been deconsecrated. Celeste waited silently for him to continue. Looking back on it, he said, maybe there was a weird manic quality about him that evening, a dark energy. Right after dinner, he rushed down to his room in the basement to finish packing. Then brought up his suitcases and put them by the back door. He was eager to get going because the weather was bad and he had a long drive back to New York. Wasn't likely to get there until 2 in the morning at the earliest. But Dad didn't want to see him leave. God, he loved P.J. so much. Dad brought out his scrapbooks about all those high school and college football triumphs, wanted to reminisce. And P.J. gives me this wink, like to say, hell, what's another half-hour matter if it makes him happy? He and Dad went into the living room to sit on the sofa and look through the scrapbooks, and I decided I could save P.J. some time later by putting his suitcases in the trunk of his car. His keys were right there on the kitchen counter. Celeste said, I'm so sorry, Joey. I'm so sorry. He hadn't become desensitized to the sight of the murdered woman and the blood-stained plastic tarp. The thought of what she'd suffered was enough to make him sick to his stomach, weigh down his heart with anguish, and to thicken his voice with grief, even though he didn't know who she was. But he could not get up and turn his back on her. For the moment he felt that his rightful place was on his knees at her side, that she deserved no less than his attention and his tears. Tonight he needed to be the witness for her that he had failed to be 20 years ago. How strange that he had repressed all memory of her for 2 decades, yet now in this replay of that worst night of his life she had been dead only a few hours. Whether by 20 years or by a few hours, however, he was too late to save her. The rain had let up a little, he continued, so I didn't even bother to put on my hooded windbreaker, just snatched the keys off the counter, grabbed both suitcases, and took them out to his car. It was parked behind mine at the end of the driveway in back of the house. I guess maybe Mom must have said something to P.J., I don't know, about somehow he realized what was happening, what I was doing, and he left Dad with the scrapbooks to come after me, stop me, but he didn't get to me in time. A thin but bitterly cold rain, the blood-filtered light from the trunk bulb, and P.J. standing there as if the whole world hasn't just fallen apart, and Joey saying again, I only wanted to help.
PJ is wide-eyed, and for an instant Joey wants desperately to believe that his brother is also seeing the woman in the trunk for the first time, that he is shocked and has no idea how she got in there. But PJ says, "Joey, listen, it isn't what you think. I know it looks bad, but it isn't what you think." "Oh, Jesus, PJ. Oh, God." PJ glances toward the house, which is only 50 or 60 feet away, to be sure that neither of their parents has come out onto the back porch. "I can explain this, Joey. Give me a chance here. Don't go bug shit on me. Give me a chance." "She's dead. She's dead." "I know. All cut up." "Easy. Easy. It's okay." "What have you done? Mother of God, PJ, what have you done?" PJ crowds close, corners him against the back of the car. "I haven't done anything. Not anything I should rot in jail for." "Why, PJ? No, don't even try. You can't. There can't be a why. There can't be a reason that makes any sense. She's dead in there, dead and all bloody in there." "Keep your voice down, kid. Get a hold of yourself." PJ grips his brother by the shoulders, and amazingly Joey isn't repelled by the contact. "I didn't do it. I didn't touch her." "She's there, PJ. You can't say she isn't there." Joey is crying. The cold rain beats on his face and conceals his tears, but he is crying nonetheless. PJ shakes him lightly by the shoulders. "Who do you think I am, Joey? For Christ's sake, who do you think I am? I'm your big brother, aren't I? Still your big brother, aren't I? You think I went away to New York City and changed into someone else? Something else? Some monster?" "She's in there," is all Joey can say. "Yeah, all right, she's in there, and I put her in there, but I didn't do it to her. Didn't hurt her." Joey tries to pull away. PJ grips him tightly, presses him against the rear bumper, nearly forcing him backward into the open trunk with the dead woman. "Don't go off half-cocked, kid. Don't ruin everything. Everything for all of us. Am I your big brother? Don't you know me anymore? Haven't I always been there for you? I've always been there for you. And now I need you to be there for me, just this once." Half sobbing, Joey says, "Not this, PJ. I can't be there for this. Are you crazy?" PJ speaks urgently with a passion that rivets Joey. "I've always taken care of you, always loved you, my little brother, the two of us against the world, you hear me? I love you, Joey. Don't you know I love you?" He lets go of Joey's shoulders and grabs his head. PJ's hands are like the jaws of a vice, one pressed against each of Joey's temples. His eyes seem to be full of pain more than fear. He kisses Joey on the forehead. The fierce power with which PJ speaks and the repetition of what he says are hypnotic. And Joey feels as though he's half in a trance, so deeply in PJ's thrall that he can't move. He's having difficulty thinking clearly. "Joey, listen, Joey. Joey, you're my brother. My brother. And that means everything to me. You're my blood. You're a part of me. Don't you know I love you? Don't you know? Don't you know I love you? Don't you love me?" "Yes, yes." "We love each other. We're brothers." Joey is sobbing now. "That's what makes it so hard." PJ still holds him by the head, eye to eye with him in the cold rain, their noses almost touching. "So if you love me, kid, if you really love your big brother, just listen. Just listen and understand how it was, Joey, okay? Okay. Here's how it was. Here's what happened. I was driving out on Pine Ridge, the old back road, cruising like we used to cruise in high school, going nowhere for no reason. You know the old road, how it winds all over, one damn twist and turn after another, so I'm coming around a turn, and there she is, running out of the woods, down a little weedy slope onto the road. I hit the brakes, but there's no time. Even if it hadn't been rainy, there wouldn't have been time to stop. She's right in front of me, and I hit her. She goes down, goes under the car, and I drive right over her before I get stopped. She's naked, PJ. I saw her, part of her in the trunk there, and she's naked. That's what I'm telling you, if you'll listen. She's naked when she comes out of the woods, naked as the day she was born, and this guy is chasing her. What guy? I don't know who he was. Never saw him before, but the reason she doesn't see the car, Joey, the reason is because just then she's glancing back at the sky, running for all she's worth, and glancing back to see how close he is. And she runs right in front of the car, looks up and screams just as I hit her. Jesus. It was awful. It was the worst thing I hope I ever see. Ever happens to me my whole life. Hit her so hard I knew I must have killed her. Where's this guy that was chasing her? He stops when I hit her, and he's stunned, standing there on the slope. When I get out of the car, he turns and runs back to the trees, into the trees, and I realize I gotta try to nail the bastard, so I go after him, but he knows the woods around there, and I don't. He's gone by the time I make it up the slope and into the trees. I go in after him, 10 yards, maybe 20, along this deer trail, but then the trail branches off, becomes 3 paths, and he could have followed any of them. No way for me to know which. With the storm, the light was bad, and in the woods it's like dusk. With the rain and the wind, I can't hear him running, can't follow him by sound. So I go back to the road, and she's dead, just like I knew she'd be. PJ shudders at the memory and closes his eyes. He presses his forehead to Joey's. Oh, Jesus. It was terrible, Joey. It was terrible what the car did to her, and what he'd done to her before I ever came along. I was sick, threw up on the road, puked my guts out. What's she doing in the trunk? I had the tarp. I couldn't leave her there. You should have gone for the sheriff. I couldn't leave her there alone on the road. I was scared, Joey, confused and scared. Even your big brother can get scared. PJ raises his head from Joey's, lets go of him, gives him a little space for the first time. Looking worriedly toward the house, PJ says, Dad's at the window, watching us. We stand here like this much longer, he's going to come out to see what's wrong. So maybe you couldn't leave her there on the road, but after you put her in the trunk and came back to town, why didn't you go to the sheriff's office? I'll explain it all, tell you the whole thing, PJ promises. Let's just get in the car. It looks strange, us standing here in the rain so long. We get in the car, turn on the engine, the radio, then he'll think we're just having a private chat, a brother thing. He puts one suitcase in the trunk with the dead woman, then the other. He slams the trunk lid. Joey can't stop shaking. He wants to run. Not to the house, into the night. He wants to sprint into the night. Through Asherville and across the whole county, on to places he's never been, to towns where no one knows him, on and on, into the night. But he loves PJ, and PJ has always been there for him, so at least he's obligated to listen. And maybe it'll all make sense. Maybe it isn't as bad as it looks. Maybe there's hope for a good brother who will take the time to listen. He's only being asked for time to listen. PJ locks the trunk and takes the keys out of it. He puts his hand against the back of Joey's neck and squeezes lightly, partly as a gesture of affection, partly to urge him to move. Come on, kid. Let me tell you about it, all about it, and then we'll try to figure out what's the right thing to do. Come on, in the car. It's just me. Just me. And I need you, Joey. So they get in the car. Joey takes the passenger seat. The car is cold and the air is damp. PJ starts the engine, turns on the heater. The rain begins to fall harder than before, a real downpour, and the world dissolves beyond the windows. The interior of the car seems to shrink around them, humid and intimate. They are in a steel cocoon, waiting to metamorphose into new people and be reborn into an unguessable future. PJ tunes the radio until he finds a station that is coming in clear and strong. Bruce Springsteen, singing about loss and the difficulty of redemption. PJ turns down the volume, but the music and the words are as melancholy when played softly as they are when played louder. I figure the son of a bitch must have kidnapped her, PJ says. Been holding her somewhere in the woods, in a shack or a hole somewhere, raping her, torturing her. You read about that sort of thing. Year by year, there's more of it. But who'd ever think it would happen here in a place like Asherville? She must have gotten away from him somehow when he let his guard down. What did he look like? Rough. What's that mean? Dangerous. He looked dangerous. A little crazed. He was a big guy, maybe 6'4", a good 240 pounds. Maybe it's a good thing I didn't catch up with him. He could have creamed me, Joey. That's how big he was. I'd probably be dead now if I'd got up with him. But I had to try. Couldn't just let him run away without trying to bring him down. Big guy with a beard. Long greasy hair, wearing dirty jeans. A blue flannel shirt with the tail hanging out. You have to take her body to the sheriff, PJ. You have to do that right now. I can't, Joey. Don't you see? It's too late now. She's in my trunk. Could look like I was hiding her there until you found her by accident. All sorts of interpretations could be put on it, and none of them good. And I don't have any proof that I saw the guy chasing her. They'll find proof. His footprints, for one thing. They'll search the woods out there, find the place where he was keeping her. PJ shakes his head. In this weather, the footprints have all been washed away, and maybe they won't find where he was keeping her either. There's no guarantee. I just can't take the chance. If they don't turn up any proof, then all they have is me. If you didn't kill her, they can't do anything to you. Get serious, kid. I wouldn't be the first guy to be railroaded for something he never did. That's ridiculous, PJ. Everyone around here knows you, likes you. They know what kind of guy you are. They'll all give you the benefit of the doubt. People can turn on you for no reason, even people you've been good to all your life. Wait till you've been away at college longer, Joey. Wait till you've lived a while in a place like New York City. Then you'll see how hateful people can be, how they can turn on you for little or no reason. Folks around here will give you the benefit of the doubt, Joey insists. You didn't. Those two words are like a pair of body blows, a 1-2 punch of the truth that leaves Joey deeply shaken and more confused than ever. God, PJ, if only you'd left her back there on the road. PJ slumps in the driver's seat and covers his face with his hands. He's weeping. Joey has never seen him weep before. For a while, PJ can't speak, nor can Joey. When at last PJ finds his voice, he says, I couldn't leave her. It was so awful. You didn't see, you can't know how awful. She's not just a body, Joey. She's somebody's daughter, somebody's sister. I thought about what if some other guy had hit her and I was her brother? What would I want him to do in my place? And I'd have wanted him to take care of her, to cover her nakedness. I'd never want him to just leave her there like a piece of meat. Now I see maybe it was a mistake. But at the time, I was rattled. I should have handled it differently. But it's too late now, Joey. If you don't take her to the sheriff's office and tell them what happened, then the guy with the beard, the long hair, he's going to get away. Then he'll do to some other girl the same as he did to this one. PJ lowers his hands from his face. His eyes are pools of tears. They'll never catch him anyway, Joey, don't you see that? He's long gone by now. He knows I saw him, can describe him. He wouldn't have hung around these parts 10 minutes. He's out of the county by now, running fast as he can for the state line, headed for some place as far away from here as he can get. You better believe it. Probably already shaved off his beard, hacked at his long hair, looks totally different now. What little I can tell the cops won't help them find him, and I sure as hell can't testify to anything that would convict the bastard. It's still the right thing to do, going to the sheriff. Is it? You're not thinking about Mom and Dad. Maybe if you thought about them, it wouldn't be such a right thing. What do you mean? I'm telling you, kid, when the cops don't have anybody else to pin this on, they'll try to pin it on me. They'll try real hard. Imagine the stories in the paper. The star football player, the local boy who made good and won a full scholarship to an Ivy League university, gets caught with a naked woman in the trunk of his car, tortured to death. Think about it, for God's sake. The trial's going to be a circus. Biggest circus in the history of the county, maybe the state. Joey feels as though he is repeatedly throwing himself against a giant, furiously spinning grindstone. He is being worn down by his brother's logic, by the sheer power of his personality, by his unprecedented tears. The longer Joey struggles to discern the truth, the more confused and anguished he becomes. PJ switches off the radio, turns sideways in his seat, leans toward his brother, and his gaze is unwavering. It's just the two of them, and the sound of the rain. Nothing to distract Joey from the fiercely persuasive rhythms of PJ's voice. Please, please, listen to me, kid. Please, for Mom's sake, for Dad's. Think hard about this and don't ruin their lives just because you can't grow up and shake loose of some altar boy idea of what's right and wrong. I didn't hurt this girl in the trunk, so why should I risk my whole future to prove it? And suppose I come out all right, the jury does the right thing and finds me innocent. Even then there'll be people around here, lots of people, who will continue to believe I did it, believe I killed her. All right, I'm young and educated, so I get out of here, go anywhere, start a new life where no one knows that I was once tried for murder. But Mom and Dad are middle-aged and dirt poor, and what they have now is pretty much all they're going to have. They don't have the resources to pull up stakes and move. They don't have the options that you and I have, and they never will. This 4-room shack they call a house, it isn't much, but it's a roof over their heads. They almost don't have a pot to piss in, but at least they've always had a lot of friends, neighbors they care about, and who care about them. But that'll change even if I'm cleared in a courtroom. The arguments rolled from him, a persuasive tide of words. The suspicion is going to come between them and their friends. They'll be aware of the whispering, the unceasing gossip. They won't be able to move away because they won't be able to sell this dump. And even if they could sell it, they don't have any equity to speak of. So here they'll stay, trapped, gradually withdrawing from friends and neighbors, more and more isolated. How can we let that happen, Joey? How can we let their lives be ruined when I'm innocent in the first place? Jesus, kid, okay. I made a mistake not leaving her back there and not taking her to the cops after I wrapped her up and put her in the trunk. So go get a gun and shoot me if you have to, but don't kill Mom and Dad. Because that's what you'll be doing, Joey. You'll be killing them. Slowly. Joey cannot speak. It's so easy to destroy them, me. But it's even easier to do the right thing, Joey. Even easier just to believe.
Pressure, crushing pressure. Joey might as well be in a deep-sea submersible instead of a car at the bottom of a trench 4 miles under the ocean. Thousands upon thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch, testing the integrity of the car, bearing down on him until he feels as though he will implode.